today marks exactly 38 months since Russia's war on Ukraine started, and we'll take a closer look at the military situation there. I'm Julian Repke, and this is BILD Situation Room. And we start with distressing images from last night. More than 200 rockets, cruise missiles, and kamikaze drones were launched by Russia on various cities across Ukraine, including the capital, Kyiv. Let's take a look at the grim footage from last night. Here we witness ballistic missiles striking Kyiv, with several of them hitting in rapid succession. This means, yet again, the Ukrainian air defense has successfully managed to intercept some of the incoming projectiles. According to Ukrainian reports, around 180, but approximately 30 missiles, cruise missiles, and drones managed to get through. We'll also see some additional footage shortly of these massive explosions that have shaken various parts of Kyiv. We have at least 9 fatalities, 2 children are still missing, and there are also over 63 injured. We're now looking at the footage once more, showing that Ukraine has managed to shoot down several drones and other projectiles. Here we also see an explosion in the sky over Kyiv, and we can observe that one of the rockets detonates before it impacts the ground. However, numerous others have successfully struck their targets, resulting in the deaths of many people while they were sleeping. Another terrorist attack by Russia, immediately following their claim or forceful insistence yesterday that they would stop the war if Ukraine simply agreed to surrender vast territories to them unconditionally. Much of what they have illegally seized through military actions, that's exactly what the US sees. From President Donald Trump, who yesterday introduced what he claims to be his final and conclusive plan in London. And we want to take a closer look at the entire situation on the map now. What would actually happen if Ukraine were to accept this proposed plan? So we're looking at the whole thing, seeing the map of Ukraine here, and noticing that the parts occupied by Russia are actually supposed to become 3 different states, meaning 3 different things are supposed to happen with them. We'll start with Crimea, which was illegally annexed in 2014. It's supposed to be legally recognized, which would mean Crimea is now Russian, not just in the eyes of the United States, but that's the current discussion, at least as it stands now. Even Ukraine is supposed to say, yes, that's fine, we'll sign it like that, and as a result, there would be no more claims for reparations, for example. But it goes much deeper, as for example, there would be no United Nations resolution anymore. Component placement and nothing else that Ukraine could attempt to push through to pressure Russia, at least diplomatically, to pressure them. These territories, like Crimea, to return them, which they unlawfully seized and annexed during the course of the year 2014 itself, of course. So here, let's leave this green for now. That means a legal recognition, as Trump says, should be granted for Crimea. Now we're dealing with a very large area, specifically consisting of a total of 4 regions that are currently under occupation in Ukraine. From Luhansk here in the east, including Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, all of which are currently under occupation. The idea is that here, it is effectively acknowledged, that's the wording, effectively acknowledged that these areas are under Russian control, which also does not mean a legal recognition. That means the US would not say, yes, this is now Russia, but they would effectively acknowledge that Russia is present here and controls everything, and we'll take a closer look at the whole situation later. What happens with it? And only a few areas, specifically the occupied territories in Kharkiv, we'll take a look at them here, and we'll see them up here around Vovchansk. Only these territories would Russia have to return to Ukraine. That means an absolute Russian victory. They'd keep all they annexed, all they illegally held on to, and they'd only have to give back these territories that have been under attack since last May, particularly north of Kharkiv and in the vicinity of Kupiansk, as a kind of gesture of goodwill, even though they were, in a sense, unlawfully attacked there under international law. Ukraine wouldn't gain much in return, no NATO membership, no security guarantees from the Americans, but would essentially remain as it is now. The Europeans are expected to handle everything, including the reparations costs. These massive damages, totaling around 700 billion euros, Europe would manage, while the US would fully withdraw. A deal that, understandably, has not yet been accepted by Ukraine, the European Union, or major nations including France and the United Kingdom up to this point. And as such, it's a deal that exists, one that Trump would like to have, that Putin would like to have, but that no one else supports. That Ukraine does not support this deal, and a surrender, which it would be, has also been made clear several times in the past few days. We're taking a closer look at Ukrainian long-range attacks, which are most likely aimed at strategic military targets located deep inside Russian territory. Here we're witnessing a massive explosion from 2 days ago at the Grad 51 depot, which is the missile and bomb storage facility of the Russian Defense Ministry, number 51, located in the Vladimir Oblast. It's situated east of Moscow, approximately 500 kilometers away from Ukraine's border. We don't have any footage showing what exactly hit this site, but it's reasonable to assume that something did strike this specific area and that it ultimately resulted in a total of 200,000 tons of ammunition. So the current estimate is that 200,000 tons of ammunition exploded here. The fire and the explosions we're seeing here have been ongoing for 2 days now. That means we've had massive secondary explosions and, time and again, new material that's been blown into the air here. The rescue teams, or at least the fire department, remains on site here, working to bring the entire situation under control. Casualties, civilian casualties, reportedly there have been none. If there were soldiers in this ammunition depot, then it's relatively safe to assume that they didn't make it out. And that is just one attack that Ukraine has carried out in Russia over the past few days. Let's take a look at the second one. It targeted an alleged drone factory, specifically a kamikaze drone production facility in Tatarstan, close to the Kazan region. So that's positioned quite far east of Moscow, in this case even approximately 1,000 kilometers away from Ukraine's border. And let's take a look at the whole thing. In this case, it was apparently several UJ-22 drones from the Ukrainian Air Force that were deployed. Let's mark them quickly. It's a bit hard to see. The Russians kept trying to intercept it. That means they repeatedly fired at it with missiles, most likely utilizing projectiles from the Panzer S-1 air defense system. We can already see the first explosion here and observe that this explosion has already missed the UJ-22. We'll just let the whole video play now and see, well, how overrated the Russian air defense really is, which claims, we're the best and most advanced here and have very modern systems. The S-1 tank has only been in production since the 2000s, and now we're witnessing yet another explosion close to the drone. We'll let it play out and zoom in right away. The drone, just briefly again, here you can see it quickly, so that's the drone moving here. And now we're witnessing yet another explosion caused by a separate rocket, which once again completely misses the drone and fails to take it down. And that's why the Ukrainians also say that out of the 6 drones, some have hit, presumably the target, though we don't have any footage of that. However, others were also, and there are recordings of them, shot down. So here once more, a precise comparison, so we can see it's quite hard to make out. Here's the drone, and here the explosion of the missile. This means that apparently, at least in this sequence here, it didn't work at all to shoot down this very small, simple Ukrainian drone, even though they had the chance to. The air defense failed in the vicinity, and even though multiple systems were actively deployed here to defend against such threats. From Russia, we head to Ukraine, where we want to take a look at the battlefield to see what Russia has attempted in recent days and what they have managed to accomplish in their push forward. First, we'll take a closer look at a failed attempt near Siversk. Russia, according to the Ukrainian army, reportedly deployed a total of 3 armored vehicles there, are said to be BTR armored personnel carriers attempting to push through and reach the front lines with 3 armored vehicles. Now we're seeing that the entire operation has once again gone seriously wrong, and it's entirely because of the Ukrainian army's surveillance drones in action. And now the kamikaze drones are actively targeting this convoy of 3 vehicles. You can also see quite clearly from the tracks here that the Russians believe, or at least consider it significantly safer to follow these existing paths in order to minimize the risk of driving directly into minefields. Nevertheless, we can see now, we just witnessed it, how it went around the corner diagonally here, that the first vehicle has just been hit, already an impact, and we have the second and the third vehicle. Here, this one's already been destroyed earlier, and now we're watching as the vehicles continue to move forward. One by one, here it is, struck repeatedly by these drones. And by the end of the attack, all 3 suspected BTR armored personnel carriers, some say infantry fighting vehicles or wheeled armored vehicles, were here, destroyed by the Ukrainian drones. So this is an attack that once again did not work. A mechanized attack, yes, relatively small, but still comparatively significant, if you take into account that the Russians have frequently attacked in recent months using quads or laders or even donkeys. So in this case, at least a mechanized attack with armored vehicles, though it hasn't achieved much. Other attacks, however, proved to be more successful, and interestingly, these were once again carried out not with armored vehicles, but rather through the use of drones and infantry units. Let's examine an attack on Tarasivka. We see the Russians softening the village for an assault. That means we continuously see new impacts from fiber optic guided kamikaze drones, which are very, very, very precise in hitting the openings of the houses. Or the ruins here, flying in and consistently causing explosions inside the houses. Here we first see the approach from above. Now the Ukrainian soldiers are seen taking cover, and we can see it quite clearly here. The drones are capable of actually flying into the houses, exploding inside, and thus causing not only significant damage to the structures of the houses, but also presumably wounding and killing Ukrainian soldiers. We'll see momentarily that the same opening is targeted multiple times. That means there are also Ukrainian dead soldiers visible here who are attempting to break free. Now we see here the first Russian throwing a grenade directly into one of the houses. That means we've seen it again and again that the Russians avoid direct firefights because it's simply not very efficient, but rather because if they manage to fight their way close to the respective positions, or in this case buildings, that they then throw these grenades inside and quickly retreat so that the houses explode shortly afterward. Now, but here it's quite interesting to see what I just mentioned. These are always the same ones. Holes in the buildings, here we observe them consistently targeted by new drones carrying out the task with remarkable precision. The Ukrainians continue attempting to barricade themselves there. However, in the end, it's simply the situation where the drone observes them repeatedly flying into the same hole. And after all the barricades are gone, the interior is severely damaged and the Ukrainians there are presumably wounded or even killed. In the end, we see the Russian tricolor being waved once again over Tarasivka and observe that also, this village too is now under Russian control. We see the surrounding devastation once more. That means, of course, what remains there is no longer habitable or worth living in, to put it plainly. Civilians can't live there anymore, yet right now, Russia doesn't seem to care about that issue. Here we see another place just a few kilometers away. We'll see it on the map shortly. Here too the Russian army has advanced. We've already reported on Sukhar-Balka, the name of this small village, in recent days. There the Russians had reached the southern, more rural section of the village, so to speak, and had taken over the first houses. However, now we observe that the northern part, which includes 3- and 4-story apartment buildings, the school and other structures, has also fallen under Russian control. We once again observe the intriguing behavior of the Russians as they are firing shots into the air. That's something you typically only witness in the Middle East when soldiers celebrate by doing that, but the Russians are doing the same here, even towards the drone. But that's probably just their way of expressing joy, and here's what I was talking about. Several buildings of different sizes now stand in the northern part of Sukhar-Balka, and now we're essentially seeing the evidence from the Russian surveillance drone published by Zvezda News, which is directly tied to the Russian army, and it's clearly intended to demonstrate this entirely devastated town has now, as Russia refers to it, been successfully liberated. Let's take a look at this on the map and see that this is currently the most successful Russian offensive in the center of the front. Let's take a closer look at it on the map. Now we see Sukhar-Balka. Just a few days ago, the Russians had almost reached the very southern edge. Now we can clearly observe on our map from Deep State Map, the mapping provider, that the entire village area, which is roughly this size, is currently under Russian control. What we also just saw were footage from Tarasivka. Here, the mapping provider isn't quite up to date yet compared to what we just saw in the video, because the video we just watched was actually from the northern part of the village. This means that all of Tarasivka is now under Russian control. All of this fits into a whole series of villages that have fallen under control. We can see it here with Kalinove, Alexandropil, and 3 additional villages that were captured over the last 4 weeks. That, however, one must clearly say, is the most successful Russian offensive we are currently witnessing. And if we look at that up there, that's 4 kilometers, then overall we can see that here, perhaps locally at a small section of the front, they advanced about 8 kilometers forward. For the Russians, this seems to be acceptable, despite the high losses that have to be endured for it. For the Ukrainians, it's naturally a kind of, well, at least a partial counterbalance to the Russian advance. And that shows, of course, that the Ukrainian front is currently holding up very well in most other areas. And one reason why the Russian offensive is stalling almost everywhere else is also that the Ukrainians have been very successful in mining the areas, meaning they are mining the front lines. They're not only doing it on the ground, but also from the air, as new footage reveals. We have obtained footage that clearly demonstrates Ukrainian drones dropping so-called TM62 mines. These are truly fascinating recordings, as they clearly show, all at once, a Ukrainian army video that depicts 4 mines being dropped in action, dropped at multiple strategic roads, which then quickly result in the complete disabling of 4 Russian military vehicles in operation. We can already see the first mine drops up there on the right side. Now we see the next one here, and we can pause briefly to see how the whole thing looks. So these are the classic landmines, if you will, that are currently being deployed here, and are specifically designed with either a pressure-sensitive trigger mechanism or a magnetic activation system. That's why they don't explode upon being dropped, but instead are specifically designed to detonate only when an actual Russian armored vehicle later approaches these mines in their deployed positions. So now we're seeing how the mines drop onto the roads, and also seeing the various, so to speak, 4 screens we just saw, which are the stories that follow. Specifically, after the mine is dropped, a Russian vehicle, in this case what looks like a BMP, an infantry fighting vehicle, drives over it and is destroyed. We now see the next story of the next mine. Here too we see a massive explosion in the center. The first vehicle has passed by. We see it here on the left side, I hope. And the second vehicle, which also aimed to move in that direction, unfortunately struck the mine and was subsequently destroyed. The third screen down here. We also see a Russian vehicle which, as we've already observed, is driving past numerous tanks and armored personnel carriers that have already been completely destroyed in the area, is also hit here and at least partially damaged. And the exact same thing occurs once more at the fourth spot. So this long-range striking that we see here is extremely important for the Ukrainians because it concerns roads and areas where the Russians think they can move safely. Where they assume someone has already been, it's a road they've previously used before. So we can continue moving from A to B here. However, we now notice all the wreckage scattered around, including a BMP with a body among the debris, which we definitely need to pixelate. Up here, it seems most of them survived and are currently running out of the burning vehicle. Sorry, down here, the Russian soldiers are running out of the burning vehicle in this direction. However, overall, another 4 Russian armored vehicles have been taken out as the Ukrainians have been targeting them from the air with their large drones, which are called Baba Yaga and others, which can drop multiple mines that then detonate, sometimes hours or even days afterward, leading to delayed destruction. It's not just the front, both armies are striking further behind the lines. First, let's take a look at a Russian video showing the destruction of another HIMAS system belonging to the Ukrainian army. Let's leave it right here at the beginning and see. We have here a classic HIMAS launcher, which means on 2 axles, moving from point A to B, even behind it. The rocket launcher is loaded here, you can see that, and theoretically, it can also be swapped out. And here on the left, we have a support vehicle, which is quite typical, as they rarely operate alone and are often accompanied by a Ukrainian army off-road vehicle. We can now see that this system is under attack, presumably by a, or allegedly, as the Russians claim, by a Iskander missile. Swing, and we're witnessing a massive explosion, evident also from these secondary explosions, which we can now see here. We see that is rocket fuel, so this is indeed an actual hit by the Russian army that has landed here, and the entire incident has been located and is taking place 40 kilometers behind the front line near the town of Kramatorsk. So the major city of Kramatorsk, which means the Russians have managed here, both with their surveillance, first with reconnaissance drones, and then with the Iskander missile. At least allegedly managed, that's how it looks, and that's what the Russians are claiming to have destroyed this home artillery here. That's of course a very painful blow for Ukraine. Overall, they've only received 40 of these. Some were damaged or destroyed, numbers keep dwindling and there are no replacements coming in. Donald Trump is not supplying any new HIMARS artillery. This represents a particularly painful blow for Ukraine, as they possess only a limited number of these highly advanced and, as we know, typically 85-kilometer range weapon systems. Russia is also continuing to lose systems behind the front lines, though in this case it's probably less painful because they have so many of them. We're currently watching a video of a Grad rocket launcher positioned in Sourde. In just a moment, we'll take a closer look at the map and observe that this specific Grad rocket launcher is being repeatedly targeted and struck by small kamikaze drones. It indeed requires some adjustments. We just saw the first one, here comes the second, and I believe there are 2 or 3 more that keep hitting this spot, and the Ukrainers know that there are still 40 rockets in here, or at least part of the load, a maximum of 40 rockets. That's why they keep shooting at it, because they know that eventually, if we keep hitting it with new kamikaze drones, the payload will likely explode, which then happens with the 5th or 6th drone. Here we see it. A massive explosion in this case, without a doubt, a huge explosion. This isn't particularly painful for the Russians. First, the crew's already gone, and second, they have hundreds, if not thousands, of Grad rocket launchers at their disposal. But in that sense, there's one less here, which isn't particularly bad for them. Still, the Ukrainians managed to successfully destroy this launcher despite the odds. And that's interesting, at the launcher's maximum operational range. To be precise, we see the entire incident occurred here near Sourde. And if we take a closer look at the scale up there, it's approximately 20 kilometers maximum, or perhaps even 20 to 22 kilometers to the front line. That means the Russians have positioned themselves as close as they could with the missile launcher to fire off those 40 rockets. You can't be too far away, or the launcher won't hit Ukrainian targets. And nonetheless, the Ukrainian small quadcopter kamikaze drones managed to successfully destroy it right there. That means the Ukrainians have indeed succeeded in dramatically boosting the range of these small quadcopters through a variety of ingenious and unconventional techniques, which we can't openly discuss here. That you can definitely stand up to a Grad rocket launcher. And if the Russians are just about ready to fire, positioned roughly 20 kilometers from the front, the Ukrainians are already there. 2, as we have clearly observed, attack this system by deploying a surveillance drone along with at least 5, possibly even more, small kamikaze drones. Lastly, let's take a look at another operation by the Ukrainian Air Force, showcasing yet again a truly remarkable and impressive maneuver carried out by a Ukrainian MiG-29 to drop French AASM-250 bombs. Here we witness the remarkably low approach, skillfully flying just barely above the treetops in a daring maneuver. the MiG-29, and now we'll just watch and perhaps count the seconds. It's at most 5 seconds from this extreme low-level flight, which the Russians cannot prevent until the moment. Now we see it, where 2 of these guided glide bombs are fired or launched, which, due to their distinct design and structural characteristics, actually have a quite significant range of approximately 40 kilometers in total. So we're seeing the whole thing, a daredevil maneuver by the Ukrainians. They're diving back down right away. Naturally, they have to act quickly, out of the range and altitude of the Russian radars and their air defense systems, particularly missiles, in order to effectively evade being targeted and stay safe. And the whole thing is just extremely effective. Here we see another video from the Ukrainian Air Force in the Kherson region in the south of the country, and we can clearly see how much the Russians also know that they are under surveillance. This means a classic rotation is taking place here. That means we can clearly observe what new soldiers arriving here are rushing into one of these specific locations. The last ones are moving quickly because they're fully aware they're under Ukrainian observation. What you might not realize just yet, though, is that one of the MiG-29s is already in the air and is preparing to deploy these ASM-250 hammer bombs. That's the term, hammer bombs. This is the building we just saw earlier, located in the Russian-occupied southern part of the country. And within a very short sequence, we see 2 massive explosions. 2 explosions happening right now. That means the Russians who were inside there were presumably killed during that particular incident. This whole situation once again shows us just how important the Ukrainian Air Force remains, that it is still active, and that it is, of course, operating near the front lines, where it is targeting Russian units in the occupied territories. Interestingly, it's the case that the Ukrainians are still relying on these MiG-29s for their offensive operations. The F-16s and the Mirages, which they are actively deploying, originate from American and French production lines. They are primarily utilized for defensive operations, specifically targeting and shooting down Russian drones, as reportedly occurred more than a dozen times just last night, and that's precisely why the outcomes. The outcomes of Russia's massive attacks involving over 200 projectiles could be significantly minimized here.